Hello, I'm Penny Jane Burke, and I'm going to be talking to you today about sex, sexuality, and gender. Just to tell you a little bit about myself before I start, I'm a sociologist of gender, and I think it's a very exciting subject, very important for understanding our relationship to the world. Everything is gendered. Once you start to see things in this way, you'll be able to see things perhaps that you haven't seen before. It's quite exciting to be introduced to some of these theoretical perspectives, I hope. So I will get the first slide up just to give you a sense of what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to be talking in four parts. The first is to think about what sex and gender means from a sociological perspective. The second part will be thinking about different theories of gender. The third part will be thinking about social change in relationship to notions of patriarchy and masculinities. And finally, to think about feminist theories and questions of sexuality and gender diversity. And your reading for this week is there on the screen, so make sure you engage with that chapter. It will give you a real good kind of overview and also support this lecture. So to begin with, I'm going to be exploring sociological perspectives of gender. So sociologists think about sex and gender as different concepts. When they talk about sex, they're thinking about the biological differences and physiological differences between human bodies. So for example, between male and female bodies. When they talk about gender, they're talking about the social, cultural, and psychological constructions and qualities or traits that we understand as connected to human bodies. So it's the way we project perspectives around what gender is, what gender means, how we do gender, and particularly how we think about notions of masculinity and femininity. So that's the difference between sex and gender. And studying gender is really exciting because everything in the social world is in one way or another gendered in terms of social constructions. So it helps us to understand how masculine and feminine identities form our relationships, our interactions with our wider social communities, our broader societies, and also on the micro level with each other on an everyday basis of how we understand our relationship to others and to the world and ourselves. It also helps us to understand how we think about other people, how we make sense of other people and who they are. And it helps us to develop an understanding of how structures in society are themselves gendered, and that's really important. So gender isn't just about our individual identity, it's about the external power relations and the different kinds of resource allocations that are structured into our institutions. So our institutions such as family, work, schooling, higher education, religion, leisure, sites of leisure, and so on. So we need to think then about how do these structures create the way that we think about gender, the way we do gender, the different rules and expectations, and the different roles that we might take up. And so in this way, sociology is an exciting way to think about sex and gender because it challenges our everyday taken for granted views of what it is to be either female or male in society. And it emphasizes that gender is not something that is fixed or innate, but it is something that is socially constructed. And it's socially constructed in relation to broader social institutions, social structures, different cultural relations and contexts and practices and so on. And it also recognizes that then gender doesn't just sit within particular sexed bodies. So in other words, a male may take up forms of femininity and a female may take up forms of masculinity. So gender is not tied to biological sex. It's the way that we practice particular traits that are seen in relation to gender or constructed in relation to gender. And finally, it identifies a particular structure of patriarchy as central to the experience of being female or male, which then constrains perhaps the ways in which we express our gendered roles, our gendered identities, our gendered practices, and so on. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of 3 different theoretical perspectives on gender and gender inequality. So you've already come into contact with these theoretical perspectives in your initial lectures. So functionalism would very broadly see gender inequality as just part of the mechanisms or the functions in society to ensure that labor is divided in particular ways, to allocate rewards in particular ways for different ways of doing things in society that we need, that are functions of our society. So for example, we need someone to do the raising of children, we need somebody to do paid work, we need somebody to be able to fix cars, we need somebody to be able to do the housework, and those kinds of functions in society are expressions of the way that gender is different and is sometimes unequal. Whereas conflict theory sees gender inequality as a form of social stratification and as an oppositional power relation in which there's a group that dominates another group. So in this situation of thinking about this in terms of gender, it's that men as a group tend to dominate women. So this is about subordination of a group, and it's about false consciousness of that group, that this is seen to be something natural that we accept as a natural thing, but it's actually about unequal power relations. Symbolic interaction sees gender inequality as something that is transmitted from generation to generation through processes of socialization, so that we learn particular ways of being a girl or being a boy through our interactions with others and social institutions such as schools, for example, such as families, and other key social institutions in which we become socialized. So functionalism draws attention to the roles that we play. As you are already aware, Talcott Parsons is a very important functionalist, sociological functionalist, and he developed the idea of the nuclear family, the idea that there's a mother, a father, and usually about 2 children, and that's a function of society. And so in this functionalist view, men are constructed as just naturally better suited for particular kinds of roles, like providing material support, earning money, being in an authority position, and so on, whereas women are constructed as better suited to more caring or expressive roles, such as nurturing, providing emotional support, and so on. In conflict theory, this is about the idea that men have historically had access to most of society's privileges and also resources, and that over time, this is how men as a group benefit and also are in a position of dominance over women as a group. So it's understood that it's in the interest of men as a group, not individually, but men as a group, as a social group, that they maintain their dominant position. And that might mean that they might find ways to resist trends towards gender equality. So, for example, where there might be a backlash against feminist theory, that would be seen as a way to maintain the interests of a social group of men in this instance. And in terms of social interactionism, this is, as I said, about a process of socialization over generations, but it's a process in which gender is socially maintained and reproduced through our everyday practices. So, the way that we dress, the way that we sit, the way that we stand, the way that we interact with our peers, the kinds of media we might consume or books that we might consume, and so on and so forth. And they think about this in terms of sex role socialization. Thank you. I'm going to start part 2 in just a moment.